Hello, this is the video for 11.3 homework. So I know we're kind of working on some trickier things, doing those reflections, finding the distance there. So I'm going to help go over these problems on our homework here. So number one tells us that on the coordinate plane provided, each unit is 20 miles. So every time we have a unit, we're going to need to multiply that by 20 when we're done. So we'll find the units on the graph, but then it's been scaled down 20 times smaller. So we need to make it 20 times bigger when we're finished. So using the coordinate plane to find out how far apart, use the coordinate plane to find out how far apart two airports are from each other. So first we want to graph these. So A is at 125. So I notice this is here 100. Half of 100 is 50. So this is counting by 50s. So if I'm doing 25, that means it's going to be kind of in the middle of 0 and 50. So here's 100, here's 150. So 125 is right here in the middle. And then I need to go down 325. So it's kind of right smack here in the middle of this box. So over 125, down 325, negative. So there is A. So I want to mark that so I remember which is which. And then B is over 125, which we found here. And then up 125, here is B. So on these, I notice their X's are the same. So they're on this same line going down. They're over both the same 125. So now we want to find the distance from A to the x-axis. We're going to do units and miles. So I know to go from 0, which I was on here, and down was the absolute value of negative 325. So I went down 325, which means that is 325 units. So we went 325 units here. And now we need to change that to miles. So remember, every unit was 20 miles. So we need to do 325 times by 20 will tell us our miles. So I'm going to let you go ahead and do that part. So now it wants us to find from B to X axis. So we're at 125 to get to 0 here on the X axis. So 0 to 125 is the absolute value, is 125. Absolute value just means the distance from 0 either direction. So our distance is 125 units. Now remember, every unit of those was 20, so we need to make this chart 20 times bigger to see how many miles we can go. So now it wants to know the distance between the two in miles. So we're going to take the distance of airport A to the X, the distance of B, and we want to use our miles, and we're going to add these two together, and that will tell us our total miles. So we times it by 20 to find the miles, and we need to add A and B together to get our total distance. Number 2 says, what are the coordinates of point negative 3.9? I said point Z. Sorry, I skipped Z. I was like, I knew I said something wrong. Point Z, we've got negative 3.9 and negative 9.3. And then we want to reflect across Y. So I know this chart isn't perfect here, but we're going to go over almost to 4, and then we're going down 9. So we're reflecting over Y. So remember, so this is X, this is Y. We want to reflect across Y. So Y stays the same and X becomes opposite. So the opposite of negative 3.9 is positive 3.9, and we don't even need that plus sign in the front. We can just cut that right out, comma, then y stays the same. The one we reflect over stays the same. So now it would be over and down. So it would reflect across that y. The one we reflect stays the same. The other one becomes opposite. Number 3 wants us to look at this graph here and then find the distance between the points. So I can see to get from to F, we go an absolute value of -4, which is just a distance of 4. And then we're adding on this distance is 3. The absolute value of 3 is just 3 units. So when we add our absolute values together, it tells us the total distance there. So same thing here. We want to find the distance. So this time we're in that same quadrant. So we can just count, but remember our scales don't always go by 1. So it's a better idea to find our absolute values too. So to get from X axis to K was the absolute value of -7. And then we're going to subtract this leftover part. So from here to here, we're going to get rid of this right here is -2. So the absolute value of -2. So 7 minus 2 will tell us our answer. So, right, sometimes I can just count and see that there's 5. But if you're doing ones like this, I can't count every one little thing. I mean, I can, but I don't want to. So it's easier when we just find that absolute value, find the absolute value, and then put them together to find our total. Number 5 has these points, and we want to find the distance without graphing them. So we don't have a graph. So we need to think about where are these. So D, I'm just thinking in my mind, is going over to the left and down. So I know I'm in quadrant 3. So this is in quadrant 3. And then here we're going over to the right and down 3. So this is in quadrant 4. So these are across from each other. And I notice they both have -3 down. They went the same amount down below that X. So we want to look at our X-axis numbers here, our X numbers, and see what is this absolute value. So to get from 0 to -5, how much distance is that? That's 5. And then this distance to get from 0 to 9 is 9. And because we're crossing that axis, we've got all of this and all of this, we want to add them together. So you can look for the ones that are the same, and then you can find the absolute value, put them together if they're in different quadrants. Like this one back here, if they're in the same quadrants, then we want to subtract to just get rid of that little extra part. So number 6, again, we're trying not to use the graph. What is the distance between these points? So first we just want to look and see what is the same. So I can see the y's are the same. So these are very close, but they're opposites. So how do I get from 0 to -2.5? That's the absolute value of 2.5, which is a distance of 2.5. And this is in one quadrant, this is in another. I can see that because the signs are different. Then we're going to take the absolute value of 2.5, which is also 2.5. So I have the first one, the second one, we need to put them together, and that will give us our total distance. Number 7, again, wants to know the distance. So this time I can see my x's are the same. So they both went over 3, and then they went up different amounts. So we're finding the difference from here to here instead of going across. So this one went up 4.1, So the absolute value is 4.1. And this absolute value is 1.2. They're both in the same quadrant. They both went over to the right, up, over to the right, up. That means they're both in the first quadrant. So remember, when they're in the same quadrant, we just want to take away that extra to see their distance between them. So on this one, we actually want to take away this little part, and that will tell us how much distance is between those 2 points. Hey, now we're going to reflect across x. So x is -3. So remember, x, the one we reflect across, stays the same. So this one is going to stay the same. And then we want to do the opposite of 8. So think about the opposite of 8. Number 9 wants us to reflect this point over y. So y stays the same, y stays the same. And then we're going to do the opposite of -5.2. So flip it up, flip it over, over y, and give me the opposite of negative. Number 10 tells us that a truck driver drives 245 miles and he needs to drive m miles total. So this is his total here. That needs to be our final answer. Write an equation for the number of miles d the driver has left to drive. So there are several ways that we can write this equation. You'll want to make sure you use the variables on your on-screen keyboard when you're putting it in ed. So I know this is my total, and this is what he has left to drive. So this is what he has left. This is what he has already driven, and it should equal m. So now it wants us to write an equation for what they have left. They want d to be the answer. So right now I don't have d as my answer. So I need to rewrite this so that d is all alone. So we need to get d alone. It's a one-step equation here. So what's the opposite of 245? We want to minus 245 from both sides. So d equals, and we take it to the back. We have our total. We take away what he's driven, and that tells us what is left. So sometimes we just need to read these and see what does it want an answer for, and that should be isolated all by itself here. Number 11 wants us to graph this polygon here, and then we have to decide what shape it is making. So we're going to go over to the right 3, down 1, over to the right 3, up 4, -2 to the left, up 4, and then -2, -1. So it wants you to decide what shape is that making there. Okay, so that should be all of your homework questions for 11.3.